In this lecture, we'll discuss children's language acquisition. How do children learn language anyway? Linguist Leonard Bloomfield has written, "The acquisition of language is doubtless the greatest intellectual feat that any one of us is ever required to perform. Language is quite complicated, not just in putting words together to make sentences, but in figuring out the rules for making the words themselves. How do children know how to make plurals, for example? It seems easy at first, but knowing when to add an S sound, a Z sound, an ES sound, or an ES sound at the end of the word is pretty tough, as in sticks, dogs, matches, and puppies. These are all different sounds. Are children just memorizing each word and its plural? Or do they somehow know the rules of language? And if they know the rules, how can little kids possibly figure them out when they can't tie their shoes or wash their hands or pour milk or make their beds or put their shirts on right? There were two early basic ideas about how children acquire language. The first is behaviorism, sometimes called empiricism, which was championed by the psychologist B.F. Skinner. Skinner thought children need to receive positive and negative feedback in order to learn language. Children listen carefully to caretakers and imitate what they hear. In this theory, children learn language in the same way that they learn any other skill. This is basically conditioned response, or operant conditioning, that Pinker argued is how apes learn sign language, in which a voluntary response, signing, is strengthened or weakened depending on positive and negative consequences. Nativists, on the other hand, maintain that children's language learning is not simple imitation. Children's brains, it was argued, are predisposed to learning language. In this sense, language is not taught to children in that caregivers do not explain grammatical rules. Nativism was introduced by a young upstart named Noam Chomsky, who took on behaviorism as it related to language along with Skinner. Chomsky's view goes like this. It is difficult to explain how children acquire such a complex system unless we assume they are genetically predisposed to do so. Chomsky claimed that there is a biological predisposition to language learning, much like there is a biological predisposition to walking upright. It just happens. Children must hear language spoken around them and begin to decode it early on. You can compare this to the ape signing projects, which typically required lots of feedback in the form of sugary treats or crackers. And there is very little evidence that apes can manipulate parts of speech. It doesn't appear that they decode language in the way that young children do, with a few notable exceptions like drink fruit and finger bracelet. Needless to say, the behaviorist view went out the window with Chomsky, who revolutionized the field, so much so that people today are still talking about and debating his ideas. It's important to remember, though, that Chomsky was not saying that language springs from nothing. Parents and caregivers provide the raw data, which children then decode. Chomsky also proposed something called universal grammar, and these are common ways in which all languages are structured. He suggested that children anticipate these grammars. Linguists have spent a lot of time since Chomsky first proposed these ideas, trying to find counterexamples to the universal grammar idea, and it's still being debated. It may be that children are doing something more like taking statistics than anticipating a universal structure to language.